Nice to know how many of our present beliefs make about that much sense. The more you see of jungles, the more you wonder about those things. And anyway, they were the hardest of all things to get. You see, all medicines, at the beginning at least, now that the acculturation process is proceeding at such a rate that the old taboos have worn kind of thin in some places. But when I first started doing this, medicine is magic, and magic is secret. You don't tell anyone. One tribe will be using a totally different set of medicinal plants from another tribe. Their pharmacopoeias will be quite different. They'll overlap a bit, but the Witotos will know a plant that will heal infected third-degree burns. I've seen this without any scarring. And the Okainas, who were even in the same language group, didn't know it, because an Okaina girl told me how a Witoto woman cured her, and her tribe hadn't known this. And they just keep it separate, it's secret, even when it's a friendly tribe and a somewhat related tribe. So it was it made it rather a sporting proposition to see how much you could work out of them. And being a woman and traveling alone made it a lot easier because there was no threat to anybody. I'd have a boatman and his wife, but that's all. And an interpreter that picked up at the edge of the language area. And also I'd travel in very inconspicuous and not necessarily by choice, rather ordinary and poverty-stricken way. And so that made it better too. You go in all with fancy equipment and a fine boat and half a dozen people, you're not going to get very far. Because they're too used to being put down. And that in itself is a put down, to go in looking very elegant. So I managed to get quite a lot of stuff, and it made it rather more fun, you know, something of a game so you could feel you were pretty smart. And the one thing that even when I had formed a very strong friendship, I could not for years get anyone to tell me about was their contraceptives. I knew they had them. I knew because some medical missionaries had told me of cases in which a woman with malformed pelvis had had a terrible time giving birth, and they told her she couldn't have any more children. And in this particular case, the woman said, "Oh, that's too bad." And said, "Are you going to leave your husband?" "Oh, why should I do that?" The woman said, he's a nice man. Why would I leave him? "But you can't have any more children." And she thought, "I'll take some medicine." But she wouldn't tell what it was. And she never had another child. And over the time they were with them, there were about 4 tribes, four women in the tribe who had that same experience. And so they were convinced that oral contraceptives did exist and were effective. But at that time, I think it was about, when I first heard about it, it was about 1951, and before I'd even really started going after medicinal plants. And the contraceptives, oral contraceptives, did not get publicity and get on the market until 1960. So I believed them, and I thought it'd be kind of interesting to get them. But you just draw a blank when you mention them. In fact, you may ruin when you're building a relation with, you've gone into some tribes that's a little kind of far away and not used to white people, and maybe it hasn't seen them very often. And you're getting along fine, you say something about a contraceptive. Once I just said, I smell piri-piri, which is, and you know I've had 20 piri-piris for all different purposes, rheumatism, contraceptives, and some you wash your husband's pants with and he'll be impotent with another woman. And they use it for everything. They've got one for whatever it is. So, but every time, I even got myself practically thrown out a couple of times just by mentioning them. And so, finally, it took a long, long time, but you will eventually, if you keep going into different tribes and meeting different people, get a sudden understanding. It's like the leap of an arc between the two electric poles, and now and then it happens, and then you're really lucky. And so I did find a Hebrew woman who got them for me, and even then I had a very difficult time getting away with them, but we managed. And well, it was very funny actually how I managed. I had been thinking about this. I was going up the Rio Corrientes, and there's a Hebrew. You've been up there?
Not the Corrientes.
And there's a Hebrew colony up about halfway up the river on the way to the Makusari. And they were having a great fiesta and everyone was getting very drunk when we arrived. And you don't want to hang around when fights are apt to happen when Indians get drunk. And so we went home with this one woman who was taking her husband home to clean him up. I think he'd been a little sick. And it is not considered bad manners at all for a man to get roaring drunk and throwing up, because that's part of the fiesta. It's almost a ritual. And so she and I sat and talked, and with me she spoke Spanish, very bad Spanish, and sometimes pretty hard to understand. But she did know a little. She didn't like my boatman and his wife, neither did I by that time. And so she wouldn't speak Spanish in front of me. In fact, I found there were 3 people in the tribe who spoke Spanish excellently, or at least intelligibly. That's excellent in the jungle. And she didn't. When they had left, she said to me in Spanish, first thing she said, "Where's your husband?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't know that Indians had divorces then." I said, "Well, we are not married anymore. He is in one place, I'm in another place. He is no more my husband." Thinking I was giving a good shock, I said, "Oh, me too." And so she had been married to a very brutal man, she told me, and he beat her and so forth. Finally, he abandoned her to her great delight. And her stepfather was the witch doctor of that tribe. So he told her, it was a long time before she was willing to marry again. She'd had a bad time. And her little daughter, there's no question of custody, the child stays with the mother in jungle divorces. And he told her that she ought to marry again, and she finally did find a man she thought who was very good to her, and he was quite an important guy in the tribe. He even had a pair of shoes, and they were bright yellow. And he was the only person only Indian on that river who had a pair of shoes. And he was an awfully nice man, too. And so she married him.